This is Lawmakers, your source for all the news from under the Gold Dome. Here are your anchors, Andi Lawson and David Zelski.
Good evening, everyone. As you can see, you are looking at live pictures from the Senate and House, both of which are in session at this hour. Both chambers have long calendars today, and with the House actually taking up a supplemental calendar in an attempt to get as much work done as possible, before sine die on Friday.
Also on Lawmakers this evening, the House and Senate battle over tax reform, and a conference committee works to compromise on local transportation taxes. Also, a controversial bill to allow concealed weapons in restaurants and vehicles is tabled in the Senate.
But first, our top story tonight, House and Senate tax negotiations take a new turn. Well, the battle over tax reform continues between the House and Senate. Lawmakers Sandra Parrish is now live with us here on the set with more. Hey, Sandra.
Andi and David, House and Senate leaders remain at a standstill on tax reform after House Speaker Glenn Richardson yesterday proposed merging both the car tax elimination and income tax reduction plans together. Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle ruled the House amendment to H.R. 1246 not germane, setting off a firestorm of barbs against the Lieutenant Governor.
Mr. President, I ask for a ruling on the germaneness of the House amendment to the Senate substitute to H.R. 1246.
We have carefully looked at that amendment the House put on, and I think the Senator's request is very important. As you know, the House has a policy of automatically ruling numerous Senate amendments as non-germane to House bills. I appreciate the Senator asking the question. The Senate bill dealt solely with property taxes. The House amendment combines a car tax question with a property tax question, which in my view would be not only non-germane but questionable on the unconstitutionality of it. And the chair would rule the amendment not germane, and the bill will go back to the House.
I'm frustrated this morning. I'm really frustrated that members of the same party cannot sit down at a table on such a key issue, such a core issue to our party and to our philosophical beliefs of what we ran and why we're up here for, and not be able to work this out is beyond my imagination. I have no idea what's going on.
House Majority Leader Jerry Keene led the fight this morning, attacking Cagle for his decision.
It's obvious now he is the stumbling block, and we don't know why. We're willing to sit down and talk with him as to why he's opposed to the elimination of the car tax. I'm not sure what it is. Senators are telling us they'll vote for it. His ruling of germaneness obviously is, at best, a far stretch.
Then Speaker Richardson again took to the well for his shot.
I am an attorney, and I do occasionally rule on constitutional questions, and I assure you it is constitutional. And I assure you it's germane. And I'll assure you one more thing, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. If you will call it for a vote, the senators of the state of Georgia are ready, willing, and able to vote to give this tax relief to Georgians. And there's only one person left in this building that's in this country today that's opposing H.R. 1246. And that person denied this an opportunity to be voted upon yesterday.
The House then moved to disagree to the Senate's actions and formed a conference committee. We repeatedly tried to get the Lieutenant Governor to comment. His spokesperson then sent out this response. It's difficult to understand how Georgia families benefit from repeated press conferences where House leaders attack the governor, the lieutenant governor, the state senate, and local elected officials. We continue to hope the House leadership will change course and agree to negotiate our differences on tax reform so that we can pass meaningful legislation. We are not going to waste the 2 days we have left attacking our fellow Republicans. And we're still awaiting word whether the Senate will go along and form its own conference committee to try to hash out the differences. And Andi, David.
Thanks so much, Sandra. Well, a House and Senate Conference Committee on S.R. 845, the transportation funding bill, continues to work on a compromise that would allow voters to approve a 1-cent sales tax that local communities could use to fund transportation projects.
Yes, we might go forward and pass this enabling legislation, but not knowing what the future holds for it, the language in the constitutional amendment may have to be changed to a certain degree instead of leaving it as in this pretty straightforward and simple, but I think it would have to be a change to a certain degree if this were not to pass and become law, enabling legislation. I fear going to the people. I don't mind going to the citizens of Georgia and talking to them and telling them what they're voting on, but it sure is nice to go to them and talk to them with something in your hand that has been passed that they're voting on, instead of saying, trust me, you know, we want that to pass too.
A coalition of business and community leaders praised the efforts of the conference committee and urged the members to reach a compromise.
The Senate considered legislation expanding the rights of gun owners today. Lawmakers Bridget Snap is live at the Capitol with that story. Bridget.
David, the original bill on the floor today would simply add bailiffs to the list of officers allowed to carry guns in magistrate courts. However, an amendment added by Senator John Douglas would also allow gun owners with a concealed weapons permit to carry their guns on mass transit and in restaurants.
Let me just make sure that you understand that the subparagraph F says that they will not, regardless of whether the restaurant serves alcohol, the person carrying the concealed weapon will not be allowed to consume any alcohol if they are carrying a weapon. We're doing this because I believe that an armed citizen is a protected citizen. We're only talking about honest citizens here, honest people with concealed weapons permits, because there's nothing we can do here that will impact on dishonest people or somebody that has a penchant for carrying a weapon without a permit. We're only dealing with honest people.
Despite these assurances, several members raised safety issues.
In a land that's so plagued by gun violence, why would we want to broaden and expand the places that people can be toting their guns? I'd like to think, isn't it true, when I take my family into a restaurant, that I'm not sitting in a restaurant with people armed to the teeth with alcohol within arm's reach.
On mass transit, it appears to me, with the problems that we have today, and the people that have emotional problems that can pass a background check and that can gain the right to carry and be permitted to carry a gun, that we might be asking for a tragedy on MARTA or any other public transportation system. And it might be the next best place to go to for the fellow that's just about to fall off the edge.
Senator Vincent Ford also had an amendment today that would require Georgia universities to devise safety plans for situations like the Virginia Tech massacre.
A mechanism notifying institutions, student body, that a shooting has occurred on campus. I know if a shooting has occurred on campus, I want my son to be notified either through a cell phone or text message. We want to make sure that our children, our young people that we send off to college, are protected.
However, some confusions over the floor amendments, including Senator Ford's, led the Lieutenant Governor to table the bill. Now the bill must gain approval of both the House and Senate by Friday to pass this year. Reporting live, I'm Bridget Snap for Lawmakers.
Okay, thank you very much, Bridget. Well, the gun bill was one of nearly 60 bills and resolutions today on the Senate calendar. And to begin the day, Senator Chip Rogers called for the engrossment of 8 finance bills, meaning they couldn't be amended on the floor. This motion to engross several bills for the second day in a row prompted Democratic Whip David Edelman to take the well.
The principle is the same whether we vote one time today or whether we vote the half dozen or more times as we did yesterday. There are 56 senators in this chamber, and each should be given an opportunity to improve the legislation that is brought before you, especially during these very critical last few days when bills brought to the floor are changed without the advantage of thorough committee study and consideration the way we have in the months of January and February.
The Senate then debated H.R. 1078, dealing with compensation for the latest person to be proven innocent by DNA evidence in the Georgia Innocence Project, Mr. Willie Pete Williams. Senator Horacina Tate explains.
It was several eyewitnesses and a composite picture of him that brought him into the system. And, of course, he has been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he is innocent of this crime and has spent many years in prison as a result of that.
Will the Senator further yield?
Yes, certainly, Senator.
And am I correct that in our subcommittee, when this resolution was presented, the Justice Project presented evidence that approximately 5% of the prisoners in our system today are there wrongfully convicted, which would amount to more than 2,500 prisoners. And if we give each of those people $1 million or more through these gratuitous compensation resolutions. We'll be paying over $2.5 billion from taxpayer funds for something that is not the result of wrongdoing on the part of the state of Georgia?
Your 5% is probably, Senator, about what you heard, but the information they gave us said there will probably be about 12 cases. DNA evidence is not available for the vast majority of the cases that you're talking about. There are about 12 cases they have left to test to determine that. So I think that your $1 billion price tag is a little high.
After the 40-10 passage of H.R. 1078, the Senate passed H.B. 864 dealing with life policy coverage. But included was a committee substitute dealing with the Georgia Health Marketplace, an initiative from Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle.
All right.
This is a measure that was passed by the Senate earlier this session but has not yet been put on the House calendar. H.B. 864 now goes back to the House. And a couple of hours after the passage of H.B. 864, the Senate amended the Georgia Health Marketplace measure onto another bill. And despite questions from Senator Nan Orrock on why this keeps happening, that bill, H.B. 1221, passed as well. And just a note, the Senate took up a few bills after last night's program of lawmakers, one of those dealing with the regulation of marijuana-flavored products to minors, also known as dope candy. H.B. 280 passed 42-3 and now goes back to the House.
Apparently, with his permission, the House today gutted the robocall bill sponsored early this session by Senate President Pro Tem Eric Johnson. It was replaced with Senate Bill 408, a telecommunications licensing bill that was defeated by the House last week after it was deemed a Senate attempt to originate a revenue bill. Representative Jeff Lewis explains.
What we did to 379 with the author's permission is we took all of that language out and did a House committee substitute that included language that was the Telephone Competition Act that was on our floor for a little while on Friday. If you remember, there were concerns raised because it involved franchise fees, that it was a revenue-generating bill which originated in the Senate. And what we had to do to correct that was to find a Senate bill to attach that language to from the House so that it would pass constitutional muster. And with the help of Chairman O'Neill and Legislative Counsel, I have a letter here that explains that what we did was the proper way to do it so that it is not perceived as a revenue bill generating in the House. And all this bill would allow for more competition in your telephone markets by standardizing the process through local government application and approval.
The revised SB 379 passed without opposition. It now requires Senate approval.
Legislation that would allow law enforcement to seize vehicles of people driving without a driver's license was tabled in the Senate earlier today. Lawmakers Minu Hosseini joins us live from the Capitol with the details. Minu.
David, under House Bill 978, drivers who have never registered for a driver's license and are involved in traffic accidents or violations would be subject to vehicle seizure. Initially targeted towards illegal immigrants, the legislation now punishes anyone who drives a vehicle without having registered for a driver's license.
I'm hopeful that the Senate will take it off the table. We'll be able to negotiate any concerns that they may have had. Hopefully we remove that concern. It'll be able to pass through the Senate. If that does not happen, we'll continue to have more and more deaths occur on our Georgia public roads and highways because the Senate was unwilling to help us pass a public road safety bill.
But some opponents of this legislation call it an extreme measure that could have dangerous consequences.
There's no exemption provided. Say that a person owns a car and they need immediate transport to the closest place they can get some medical attention, and they get who they can get to drive them in the car. The officer that pulls that car over and finds that the driver's not licensed doesn't have any leeway to have any personal discretion in making a wise judgment that vehicle needs to proceed and be accompanied by him to the emergency room or wherever they're going for. So there's no language in here that would allow the discretion of that officer on the scene to choose not to impound that vehicle. There are a lot of unintended consequences and dominoes that can fall in the wake of a bill like this that does such a profound change to our laws.
Again, that legislation was tabled in the Senate today. Legislators only have the remaining hours today and Friday to pass the legislation in the 2008 session. Reporting live, I'm Minu Hosseini for Lawmakers.
Okay, thanks for that report, Minu.
According to House Speaker Glenn Richardson, the House defeated a record number of bills today. From insurance fees to a study of the Georgia coast, representatives were quite willing to vote red.
Their disability would be reviewed by a medical panel, and then if there was an appropriate job for that person after that physical disability, then they would hopefully be allowed to stay in that job instead of simply being deemed disabled and inappropriate for the position.
I'm speaking about the hiring of such persons.
So hiring, this makes no change to the initial hiring of an employee.
First, there was SB 174, requiring state employees to have their disability cases evaluated by a medical review board. It was initially 2 votes shy of passage, then reconsidered and defeated again, 55 to 107.
It's going to be market driven. If somebody goes into an agent in a small town and they see he's charging fees, they're welcome to take their business to another guy down the street. Somebody's told me that, well, in some small towns there's only 1 or 2 insurance agencies. I've never seen a small town with only 1 or 2 insurance agencies. They're like lawyers. They're on every corner just about.
Representative Howard Maxwell carried SB 183, allowing insurance agents to collect additional fees.
This is a bad bill, you all.
Insurance agent Representative Keith Hurd was incensed by the idea.
Here's someone you're saying that's is coming to your office to pay their premium, to keep their policy from lapsing, but yet you're going to charge them to come pay their premium.
After it was defeated, Maxwell decided not to try to revive that measure. An effort to change licensing requirements for certified public accountants went down when concerns were raised about reciprocity.
One of the problems I see is that we're about to allow CPAs from other states to come to the state of Georgia and practice, but yet CPAs from the state of Georgia cannot go to those other states and practice.
On reconsideration, the CPA licensing measure was defeated again. Unless amended to other legislation, Senate Bills 473, 174, and 183 and House Resolution 1016 are dead for this session. The House today agreed that state investments in companies doing more than $20 million in business with Iran should be identified. Representative Bob Smith asked for a listing of companies that do not do business with Iran.
ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, Marathon Oil, Hess. If you bought in those or invested in those companies the past year, your return would be 33.6%, which is better than the investment in those companies that do in Iran. Also, you have Devon Energy, Murphy Oil, Noble Energy. Noble Energy, 34.6. If you invested in those companies last year, your return would have been 43.6%.
Senate Bill 451 passed the House without opposition. Changes made in the House Retirement Committee send that bill back to the Senate.
Sine Die is expected this Friday, and lawmakers will produce 2 broadcasts that day. Please join us for our regular program at 7 p.m., followed by a Sine Die special at 11 p.m. That's 2 very important editions of Lawmakers on Friday, April 4th at 7 and 11 p.m. on GPB.
Today, the Senate passed a bill aiding the creation of charter schools. That was passed by substitute. Lawmakers Andi Dixon has more on this story. Andy.
And Wandi, House Bill 881 establishes a Georgia Charter Schools Commission that would have the jurisdiction to approve startup charter schools, like local school boards and the State Board of Education. House Bill 881 encountered a great deal of opposition in the Senate today from various legislators.
Members of the Senate, I rise in opposition to the bill.
But in effect, when you take into consideration M&O funds, maintenance and operation, and other things, and utilities and things of that nature that it costs, that are constant cost to schools, the public will actually be paying for 2 schools in one area.
What in effect is happening is the local system's decision is advisory. The local boards of education that are elected by the people are reduced to making advisory recommendations to a state commission.
The bill was sponsored by Senator Dan Weber in the Senate, who defended the bill on the floor.
These startup charter schools are also, despite the lower funding and the more challenging demographic, have better performance academically on average. In 2007, there were 25 petitions for new startup charter schools submitted to local boards of education. Not one of them was approved.
Now, House Bill 881 passed in Senate by committee substitute, so it now goes back to the House for approval. The bill passed the House in the first few weeks of the session. Reporting live, I'm Andi Dixon for Lawmakers.
Thanks for that report, Andy.
The focus of Chief Justice Leah Ward Sears' State of the Judiciary address earlier this year was pay raises for Superior Court, Court of Appeals, and Supreme Court justices. They currently make around $120,000 a year. They haven't received a raise since 1999 besides their annual cost of living adjustments. And Senate Judiciary Chair Preston Smith says they are overdue for the increase proposed in HB 119.
It was indeed time for us to raise the pay of judges in Georgia. The commission from the State Bar recommended a 20% pay increase to put them in line with where the State Bar believes and the Georgia Chamber and others believe where the judges should be in our current compensation. You ask, how can they recommend a 20% pay increase? And the answer is because unlike teachers and other groups, they have not been getting raises on a periodic basis like those other groups. They have not, in fact, had a raise in almost 10 years. And the longer we put off adjusting that compensation rate, the higher that percentage is obviously going to have to be to correct that disparity. So the commission from the State Bar recommended a 20% increase. The House of Representatives took the bill through and recommended essentially a 10% pay increase. There was some variance between the Court of Appeals and the Superior Court judges. Our study committee actually recommended more pay, but the compromise bill that came out recommends an across-the-board 5% pay increase to the state base pay of our Superior Court judges in Georgia.
HB 119 passed the Senate and now goes to Governor Perdue, along with HB 948, the sales tax holiday. This year's tax-free weekend is scheduled July 31st through August 3rd. Also included in the bill is an energy-efficient sales holiday, the first weekend in October for energy-efficient products under $1,500.
The House today gives final passage to a measure preventing the establishment of so-called sanctuary cities in Georgia. Representative James Mills says no city is currently harboring illegal immigrants, but that Senate Bill 340 is a preemptive strike.
I think other states have had some issues where public employees were hired and they didn't check their legal status before hiring them. There's state laws and federal laws already in place that require governments to do that. This bill basically just prevents a potential sanctuary policy where some local government could become a hideout for folks to come and work illegally.
Senate Bill 340 passed 129 to 32 and now goes to the governor for his approval.
Jekyll Island developers are backing off a plan to build condos on a beachfront parking lot on the northern end of the state-owned island. House Majority Leader Jerry Keene read a letter today that he received from the chairman of the island's development authority, informing him that legislation blocking the commercial development is no longer necessary.
After conferring with our revitalization partner, Linger Longer Communities, we have made the decision to limit use of this area, the area that is in question, to those public purposes and not development of accommodations such as hotels or condominiums. Therefore, the Buckner Amendment that was added to the Senate bill is unnecessary. In their opinion, it's overly restrictive in that it would prohibit their plans by allowing only the addition of picnic tables, bathhouses and restrooms, any additional projects which would be needed, including landscaping, improved beach access, and an environmental conservation center that will be part of this green space and park. So this will be a public park and green space. The public beach access not only is going to be there, it's going to be enhanced. As you know, for those of you that are not familiar with Jekyll, this is what it looks like now. It's an old asphalt, dilapidated parking area that is, shall we say, less than desirable now. It will be turned into a green space park, and so I'm excited that Linger Longer and the JIA is moving that direction. That was the intent of the Oversight Committee, and I think that's good news.
And this can be seen as a victory for residents of Jekyll who have pushed to restrict development.
The House today votes to support a Senate measure banning sex offenders from photographing minors, with the addition of a House bill designed to help the state sex offender residency restrictions pass judicial tests.
What House Bill 908 did in essence was to adopt what's known as the move to the offender exception. This would provide that those people impacted by the restrictions, if they had purchased a home, could continue living at that location even though one of these places later came in after the time of the purchase.
Representative Stephanie Benfield has long opposed sex offender residency restrictions, which she says do not decrease recidivism and, as in the case of the much publicized Janarlo Wilson case, are too broad.
It treats serious pedophiles, like in the case of Jessica Lunsford that we're all aware of, it treats them the same as high schoolers who engage in consensual oral sex. They both of those types of offenders have to register and have to adhere to these strict residency requirements.
Senate Bill 1 passed the House 133 to 32. The addition of House Bill 908 returns that measure to the Senate.
The president of the Georgia Institute of Technology, Wayne Clough, is stepping down on July 1st of this year. He was honored in both the House and Senate today and discussed his new job in Washington, D.C. as the Secretary of the Smithsonian.
I hope I can represent you well as the Secretary of the Smithsonian. I am the 12th Secretary and the first Georgian. And I think they're a little surprised that an old boy from Douglas, Georgia could somehow do that job, but it's one I'm greatly honored to do, and I will do my best to represent our country there, as well as hopefully make all those of you back here in Georgia proud. I'll be in the Castle building. As I tell everybody, I'll be glad to give you free tickets to go to the museums, and when you get there, you'll find out admission's free anyway, but...
And Dr. Clough began his tenure as Georgia Tech's president in 1994 and is the first Tech alumnus to hold that position.
A poignant moment today in the House when Representative Jay Neal reflected on the passing of Alan Hill, his friend of 40 years.
As he lay on his deathbed, while many of us would have been concerned about ourselves, what we were facing, the shortness of our life, Alan lay there time and time again, talking about his friends and how concerned he was about them. Though none of you ever met Alan, had you met him, you would be a better person for having known him. I want to ask you this morning, if you would, and I know you don't know Alan, but would you join me in a brief moment of silence? I would also ask you, if you would, to please remember the family in your prayers.
Lawmakers will not be seen tomorrow because the General Assembly will not be in session. Lawmakers returns Friday, April 4th at 7 with a special live Sine Die broadcast at 11 p.m. Tune in to Lawmakers Friday at 7 and again at 11 p.m. for special Sine Die coverage. If you've missed any part of this Lawmakers broadcast, tune in tomorrow when Lawmakers repeats at 5:30 a.m. You can also keep up with all the action under the Gold Dome daily on your local GPB radio station during Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and evenings at 6 p.m. on Georgia Gazette. Now stay tuned for Georgia Traveler. Tonight's episode features that old Dixie Highway. That program's coming up next here on GPB.
And that is our broadcast for this, the 39th legislative day of 2008. I'm David Zelski.
And I'm Wandi Lawson. We leave you now with live pictures from the House. We will see you on Friday.
Chair recognizes Representative Ralston for purposes of explaining the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. This was the railroad right-of-way bill that we passed out of this House unanimously.
This has been a production of Georgia Public Broadcasting.